Let's begin. It's
ready. Launch.
okay. Yeah. So good morning, good afternoon, and good evening wherever you are. On behalf of the Water Policy Center, COVID-19 Dialogue, Sectoral Impacts, Global Responses and Enhancing Resilience to Future Pandemics. It gives me a great pleasure to extend a warm welcome for our distinguished speakers, chair and participants who have joined this session. To chair this session, we have Mr. SHAKTI SINHA with us. It is my great pleasure to introduce the chair. Mr. SHAKTI SINHA is the director of Atal Bihari Vajpayee Institute of Policy Research and International Studies, MS University, Vadodara. He is a distinguished fellow and at India Foundation. Mr. Sinha was the former director of the Nehru Memorial Museum and Library and was part of the Indian Administrative Service from the 1979 batch. He has also served as a joint secretary at Prime Minister's office in the past. Without extending further, let me request Mr. SHAKTI SINHA to take the charge of the session.
Thank you, Royston. Thank you very much. Thanks to WPC and for organizing this two-day event. It's wonderful that, all these years we thought of technology and how to use technology for communications better and education, etc. And suddenly we realized that we're organizing more conferences and more seminars these days than we did before COVID had hit us. So I think it's a very unusual, interesting, sad, tragic, but yet opportunity times. We have 5 good speakers. So instructions are very clear from the host that the chairman shall speak at the end if there is time. I like the word if there is time. So it depends on my speakers. Ladies, gentlemen, you have 15 minutes each. Our first speaker is Ambassador Mohan Kumar, who's the chairman of a Government of India think tank, funded think tank called the RIS. He's also professor and dean, the Office of International Affairs and Global Initiative, Tyndall Global University. And Mohan would be speaking on post-COVID world order, challenges and opportunity. Dr. Mohan Kumar, your 15 minutes starts now.
Thank you very much, Chairman.
May I also request the other speakers and others to keep themselves on mute? Yeah, sorry, Mohan. I just wanted others to be on mute because sometimes we get feedback and that disturbs us, I'll do the same with me. Over to you. Sorry, interrupting you.
Thank you very much, Chairman. Thank you very much, Shakti. And it's a pleasure to participate in this webinar organized by the Water Policy Center. I'll try to stick to 12 or 14 minutes so that we have more time for questions. Let me begin by outlining each particular outcome as I see it in the post-COVID world order, and then see for India, what are the implications of that outcome. The first outcome that I would like to speculate about, but I think it's a near certainty, that I think the state is back in a big way. If before the COVID, we thought the market could do certain things and the state could do certain things, I am absolutely convinced that in the post-COVID world order, the state will play a much more important role than before. Now, this essentially means that if you look at the countries which have been successful in trying to tackle COVID, you need a strong state, which is correct, but you also need a state in which the citizens have a huge degree of trust. And these two are going to be extremely important in a post-COVID world. You look at countries like New Zealand, you could look at countries like Germany, you look at countries like Taiwan, you look at countries which have done well. My sense is not only do these countries have a strong state, they also have a state which evokes total trust from the citizens. And of course, good leadership goes without saying. So for India, what this means in the future is that the state not only has to be strong in India, but the state must also deliver better than it has done in the past. We saw some issues when the migrant labor started moving and so on and so forth. But essentially, whether it is direct cash transfer to the farmers, whether it is a question of making available 5 kilos of cereals and 1 kilo of pulses for the people who are vulnerable, the state delivery is going to be extremely important. And I thought this is something we should focus on. The second outcome, as I see it for countries like India, is that we have now been shown evidence, if evidence was needed, that health infrastructure is absolutely critical, public health infrastructure in developing countries, but also countries like India in particular. So I'm hoping that this COVID will result in some difference in allocation and more money being made available for public health in our budgets. Scientist after scientist has said that this is not the last pandemic. You're going to have more pandemics in the future. If that is the case, then we should be taking public health much more seriously than we have so far. So that's the second outcome that I think is extremely important. I also think that value chains, as we have known so far, will completely change. So this famous example of an iPhone and 16 countries involved in the iPhone, the last bit of assembly happens in China, and therefore you get the iPhone created in San Francisco, assembled in China. I think that model is likely to change. I don't know how rapidly it will change. I don't know in what ways it will change, but change it will, because you are not going to have just-in-time manufacturing as we understood it so far. You're going to have a different kind of value chain, call it resilient supply chains, call it value chains with trust, whatever you want to call it. There is going to be some change, and those changes need to be monitored carefully. I do believe India has an excellent opportunity in positioning itself in this value chain, because we can try to be a net public health security provider, not just for the region, but also for the world, given the background of vaccine production in India, given the background of pharmaceutical production in India, given the fact that we are able to send field hospitals to Africa. I sincerely believe India can become a regional, if not a global, net public health security provider in the post-COVID phase. Since I was a diplomat in my past life and I'm currently a professor, I also believe diplomacy itself will change in very dramatic ways. I continue to believe now that diplomacy now will be based much more again on trust. Geopolitics, geostrategy will make a huge difference to the way relations are conducted. Previously, you could have a set of countries with which you had political, strategic relations, and then you had another set of countries with which you had economic and commercial relations. The idea of ASEAN comes to mind, where ASEAN has a nuclear security umbrella with the United States and then does enormous trading with China. I am not sure this can carry on for all of us, because what you see happening is you're going to see a merging of economic, commercial, geostrategic, and cultural factors. These will all merge. You will tend to do trade, you will tend to do strategic partnerships with countries with which you are more comfortable. I don't know what criterion it will be. And talking of the international landscape, I also believe we are in the middle of a full-fledged transition from the liberal order, which is on the verge of finishing, and a new kind of order, which is yet to establish itself. What you see is two important poles, US and China, and no pun intended, they are poles apart. They're two poles, but they are poles apart. So what you really see is the EU, you've got Australia, you've got China, India, Japan, you've got other countries, a whole lot of other countries, which are trying to jostle and position themselves. And this could be very, very interesting in terms of how the new international order comes into being. That is another challenge that we need to face. The other outcome I think is extremely important is the Sustainable Development Goals which have been announced by the United Nations, to which all our countries are completely attached and committed. My question is, and I would like some of the panelists and others to comment on it, especially our chairman, who's very knowledgeable as well. Can we achieve these sustainable development goals on time? That is my question to you, frankly. We have got 2030 as the deadline for abolition of extreme poverty. China is saying we will try and abolish extreme poverty soon. But leaving aside China, I talk of India, I talk of Africa, I talk of Latin America, I talk of other countries. Can we sincerely, legitimately stick to this goal of abolition of extreme poverty by the year 2030? So this is something I ask you. Along with that, I also ask you the question about climate change. Are we now sincerely committed to a carbon neutral economy at some stage? China has very dramatically announced in the UN that they will peak in 2030 and that they will have a carbon neutral economy in 2060. This needs to be evaluated, and this needs to be considered against the background of coal-fired plants being opened in China in the last 1 year, which have exceeded the previous 3 years and so on. But I ask in general whether the goal of at least 2 degrees, forget the 1.5 degrees, can we at least work together to achieve the sustainable development goal, which was reflected in the Paris Climate Change Accords of no more than 2 degrees increase compared to pre-industrial levels? Are we on track to achieve those goals? Finally, Mr. Chairman, I also believe that we are going to see a trading environment, and if I can just spend a couple of minutes on trade, it's also an area I have specialized in. Are we seeing the end of MFN anchored WTO based international trade? Are we seeing an end to it? Is trade in the future going to be only preferential, only reciprocal, and only geostrategic? Are we looking at that? MFN trade is out. So if I have to trade with somebody, I need to have a good relationship with that country. I need to enter into an FTA with that country. So are we looking at a situation where trade becomes completely geostrategic and reciprocal, not MFN, WTO based as it was until now? Along with trade, I would urge that we also look at technology. What about 5G? How is 5G being decided in the world? And post-COVID, that'll be one of the earliest decisions that we have to decide. Is it being decided on political grounds, strategic grounds, or economic grounds? That's one. Second, if we are going towards renewable energy, what about supplies of semiconductor chips? What about supply of cobalt? What about supply of lithium? Because without these 3 things, you can't have the 4th industrial revolution. Where are these supplies located? How are these supplies going to be accessed? And how is this going to be distributed? And finally, my question or my point is on the production of a vaccine in the context of COVID. That we negotiated painstakingly a WTO declaration on TRIPS and public health, TRIPS being trade-related intellectual property rights. That very clearly says if there is a pandemic, you can say goodbye to patents. Nobody denies this is a pandemic. What we have is worse than a pandemic, if it's possible. So how is vaccine going to be produced? How is this going to be patented? How is this going to be distributed? India might be in a somewhat advantageous position because 9 out of 10 vaccines which are going to be produced are bound to have some link with India. But we have large parts of the world where health infrastructure is a problem, and vaccine needs to be made available equitably to the population of the world. So Shakti, I will stop here. I realize I've raised more questions than answers, but I'm really happy to address some of them. And since I was fortunate to speak first, I've raised these questions, but I'm happy to address some of these in the question and answer session. Once again, thank you very much for this opportunity.
Thank you, Mohan. Thank you a lot. You've been very concise, and I like your ending. In fact, when you were addressing me, for a moment, I thought I'm appearing for a job interview. You know, you wanted me to answer, but I'm sure that our other panelists and our audience would be able to contribute to that. Having said that, let me now request our next speaker, Dr. Daniela Perota. She is the National Director of International Cooperation, the Secretariat of Educational Cooperation and Priority Actions in Argentina, and she'll be speaking on higher education governance after the COVID-19 crisis. Dr. Perota, over to you.
Let me unmute it. Thank you so much. I am currently working, as you say, at the Ministry of Education, but I'm a researcher of higher education governance and internationalization, so I'm happy to be here as well in this twofold role. Well, I'll try to be as quick as I can. I did a presentation, so you can keep up with the ideas. And I must say, I'm picking up Ambassador Professor Kumar's opinion about the role of the states. I think that it is crucial. So my presentation will be about the challenges and opportunities for higher education governance. And I think I can use the Argentinian case to wrap up some conclusions regarding higher education governance as well, especially for countries like us, like Argentinian countries, Latin American countries, and also India, even though we have some differences. First of all, I would like to speak about the role of the state in Argentina. As you may or may not know, regarding this dilemma between health or the economy, our president says health first and life is first. So all the key policies regarding the tackling with the COVID pandemic has been to put health and the life of our citizens in the first place. Then I will say some quick things, some ideas about our higher education system, because there are some specificities that has to do with our response to COVID. Then I will deal with the COVID response that has put the right to higher education in the first place, as well as the right to health. And I will like to speak about some of the challenges and opportunities for higher education governance, including some ideas for the geopolitical arena. And I must say, I am totally agree with what the first presenter has said before. And I have wrapped up the idea of care diplomacy. So first, when we came to government in December 2019, our president said that we should start by the last one so as to reach everyone. That is to say, to leave no one behind. So our initial conditions before the pandemic had to do with unsustainable endowment, with high poverty levels, and hunger. With the first big and ambitious plan of the government or program of the government is Argentina Against Hunger. So hunger was the key issue of the first month of the government. But then we have the pandemic, and the pandemic, the first case in Argentina entered around the 10th of March, while the situation in Europe was at its peak, and it had to do with the circulation of the virus from Europe to Argentina, especially an Italian, a person who had been in Italy entered the region with the virus, and then we started to deal with the situation, to, as we say in Spanish, to earn time so as to create capabilities and try to keep safe as much citizens as we can, so that not so many deaths will be, or lives will be lost. So the key policies, and this is important because it has to do with my idea of care diplomacy, has to put the state first. As Kumar said, the role of the state has been key to understand the situation and to set up all these policies regarding COVID and beyond. So we have what we call ASPO in Spanish, preventive and compulsory social isolation since the 20th of March. We are still under isolation. That means a lot of time that our citizens have been in their houses. Even though some areas have now are more flexible regarding isolation. We have social distancing, which we call DISPO in Spanish, and a lot of policy measures have been taken regarding to sustain and to leave no one behind. That means, as I mentioned, if unemployment, poverty, hunger was a key issue, what the government did was to put money on these people's life so that they can cope with the situation. So we have an emergency family income, an emergency assistance program for the work and the production. So as the factories and many of the enterprises were closed, what we did as a government was to put money on these employees so that we can leverage the situation with the companies. We have border closure. We're still under border closure, even though some commercial flights are ongoing since the last 20 days, but the borders are closed, and so on measures. So this is very important because the response of the state is not isolated, and the response of the higher education system is not isolated. It has to do with this general and overview key measures of the government. So in order to put your minds, and I have 5 more minutes or 7 more minutes, we have to mention that the higher education in Argentina has some specificities, some main characteristics. First of all, it is ruled by the idea of the right to higher education. So everyone can access and graduate of higher education. And the system is mainly publicly funded. We have national universities, which is the green map on your left-hand side. And then we have other private institutions. So it is free of charge. There are no entry exams. There are no quotas. So you can, as many people as they want, they can enter to the system. It is ruled by its autonomy. So the state does not control universities. We have financial autarky. 80% of the enrollment is in public universities. And the science, and there's a mistake there, science and technology and innovation activities are publicly financed and conducted in the national university system, and it is a federal system, though it is concentrated on some big areas and capital cities of the country. This is important also because in Argentina we have this separation between the national university system and the scientific system. So the red arrows show you the most important things of this slide, which means we have the public universities and the governance of higher education has to do with the actors and the ministry. And as well, we have the science and technology system, where we have the Ministry of Science and Technology, a National Council of Scientific Research, and the National Agency for Promotion of Research, which is the one that finances the projects. So saying that, there has been a quick response to the COVID pandemic. If you may know or may not know, when the virus entered the country, we were still during the summer course and starting also the first semester of our classes. So many of our higher education students, and almost all the students, did not have presential classes since this year because the semester was starting. So when we have the isolation, the compulsory and preventive isolation and the closure of the institutions, the system has to quickly respond and go to online teaching. There has been quick adaptability. The higher education institutions have shown some resilience. And what we try to do as a government, and this is why it is important, the role of the state, is to assure the right to higher education, which is twofold, which means the individual right of every citizen to enter the university and get training, teaching, so on and so forth. And it is a collective or social right. That means to say that our people, the whole community benefits from what is going on in the university. So the things that we had to do were to mitigate inequalities, especially technology and connectivity. We had to provide aid and assistance to students, to institutions, because they were suffering from several problems. The universities proved that they have a high community engagement, and Argentina has been champion or has a strong position regarding the global research collaborations to find the vaccine. So currently we are working with some research networks, and we are one of the countries that will have the vaccine in Latin America and provide the vaccine for when it is founded or proved to be efficient in the region. So our system not only has a very strong publicly found tradition, but also a tradition of research collaborations at the global level, but especially at the regional level. And this is very important. And regarding the internationalization of higher education, which is what I mostly do at the ministry, we have repatriated our citizens that were abroad during this pandemic. We have a lot of students and researchers and professors that were having their research periods or their research or their training abroad, and we have to repatriate them while the cases were quite critical in other countries. And this opened the floor to tackle taboo issues. I will not go through this in deep because I have spent almost my 10 minutes, but here you have in three main axes what higher education institutions and with the coordination of the state has done during this pandemic. And
you have 3 minutes more, don't worry. You have 3 more minutes more, take your time. Take it.
Okay,
Very interesting, very interesting.
Thank you. So first we have to rapidly go on to virtual education. This may seem very easy for many higher education institutions, but in Argentina, we have kind of strong regulations regarding the provision of distance educations. Argentina has not signed any free trade agreement that includes the service of higher education because it is a right assured by our constitution and some laws. So not so many of our institutions were prepared to go online. This has to be said. It has been a huge effort that required a lot of energy from other actors in order to put it into practice. This is very important because some universities, the private sector had experience in providing virtual education, but not the public sector, the national universities. Regarding national universities, only a few that related to democratization activities. So this was, all the efforts were put here. And then other issues arose because, as you may know, we are not a developed country. So the access to connectivity, the access to technological equipment, the access to digital technologies was not equal and was not fully for the population and our students. So efforts were made as well in order to mitigate some of these technological and digital gaps. Regarding community engagement and research, our universities, I will start by community engagement. Our universities provided the infrastructure for field hospitals, as the buildings were not used for teaching. The buildings were used to provide more beds and more UT units, intensive therapy units, so as to prepare for the peak of the circulation of the virus and the amount of people infected. There were campaigns for prevention and support. They created contents for the people so that they can deal with the safety measures. And as well, they provided artistic and cultural content, because I will say it again, we are under isolation since the 20th of March. That's a lot of time, and we have to deal with that. And regarding research, quickly, the universities that are part and a structure of the S&T and E system, science, technology, and innovation, they started to produce medical equipment, sanitizing supplies. They provided personnel for health activities, especially the students of health careers and programs. We conducted studies on social impacts of the pandemics, regarding inequalities, regarding psychological issues, so on and so forth. And we are champions, as I said, in participating on these collaborative networks for finding the test, for finding the vaccine, and for doing and providing tests for the population to see if we had or not COVID. And regarding internationalization, as I mentioned, we suspended the mobilities. And what we had to do by hand, because there is not a unified registry, is to start counting and seeing who was abroad. This is something that the ones that we are specialized in internationalization of higher education in Latin America knows a lot. There are no records, no overall and full records of who is abroad, who is in the country, and what we can do for them. So we had to do this activity really quickly, and we have provided some funds to repatriate and to help Argentinian citizens abroad or foreigners in Argentina. Had to do this also. We provided aid also to foreign students and teachers that were in Argentina during the crisis. So, the emerging issues. I would like to say only 3 things of this slide. The most critical issue regarding teaching and training has to do with, we should start to discuss how to regulate distant education. This is one of the taboo issues of our countries, as the limits with providing a services and assuring a human right is very narrow, and it is a gray area. We have to start talking about distance education and regulate it with a strong role of the state. Some things that arose regarding research and community engagement had to do with how a peripheric or underdeveloped country as Argentina inserts or contributes to research, to global research networks from an autonomous position instead of scientific dependence. And then only something that our president and our system as a whole is very keen on is the idea of the ethical question of the vaccine. Who will be shot first? Who would it be commercialized? Would it be for free? How are we going to deal with the results of this research innovation and research activity? And finally, regarding internationalization, I will only mention the idea that was said by Kumar. The role our universities and science and technology complex have regarding addressing global problems, climate change, and this health and sanitary situation as well. So regarding, finally, this is my last slide. We are not under a health crisis. We are not under an economic crisis only. As one of our professor, and he's currently the president of the Fundación Carolina of Spain, the Carolina Foundation, which provides scholarships for students to go to Spain and Spanish people to go abroad, says we are experiencing a development crisis. So if we are under a development crisis, the solution has to do with tackling development, discussing development, and this is what Kumar said. We have the SDGs, the 2030 agenda. This is the last of the idea to tackle these issues, and universities have a key role dealing with most of all these SDGs, not only the one regarding the SDG 4 of education, but research activities, community engagement, the articulation with other actors have to do with all the SDGs. So even though we have some opportunities for higher education governance at the national levels that I will not discuss with this Argentinian idea, and we are undergoing a reform policy of higher education law, I will talk about how we should understand this new geopolitics of knowledge production, how regional integration for us, for countries like us, is very important. Especially we are a founding member of Mercosur, but also regarding university, higher education, and science and technology, Argentina is one of the leader countries providing regional public goods. International cooperation proved for us that can be done under what Kumar said: reciprocity, solidarity, friendship. It may seem like idealistic, but we proved to be on the right side of the history and on the way, how to deal with this situation. And I started my presentation saying that we have a care state in Argentina, because caring for the health, caring for the economy, caring for our citizens is the first priority. We should start trying to think about the care diplomacy. Not only we talk a lot about science diplomacy and how the landscape has changed and so on and so forth, but I will not say science or universities are the only actors. I think that the idea of care diplomacy can show this idea of symmetry, solidarity, and dealing locally and regionally with global issues, and that our universities, our higher education institutions, have a key role. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Naira. When you said that Argentina is not a developed country, I remember the historical data. In the year 1900, the third richest country in the world per capita income was Argentina. It was among the richest countries in the world. Anyway, I've been very generous with you on time, so now we'll have to really quicken up our pace. Our next speaker is Dr. Santishri Pandit. She's a professor at the Department of Politics and Public Administration at the Savitribai Phule University in Pune. She's a member of many professional bodies. I will not name them. She'll be speaking to us on pandemics and paradigm shifts, post-COVID world order, and new geopolitics. Professor Pandit, over to you. 13, 14, 15 minutes.
Thank you, Chairperson.
You have got muted. You are muted. You started well, then it got muted. I don't know why.
Respected Chairperson and my dear panelists, let me at the outset thank the Water Policy Center, Aurangabad, and its team for this conference seminar. I would like to thank Ambassador Kumar to have flagged several issues. Would like to move on from it because one is I wanted to ask the question whether pandemics create paradigm shifts. The only pandemic that created, many people say this is not a pandemic, it's a catastrophe. The Spanish flu and the First World War. You had a huge change in the international order. Will this, especially, we are debating on the origins of the virus, whether it's natural or a lab-created virus. Is it an instrument of biological warfare? And from that, because many people say that it is from the Wuhan military lab, there are conflictual issues that are coming in. So the first issue is, as COVID-19 has changed the present world order, given it a major strategic shock. And if we see these dramatic effects our everyday life, global prosperity, and international security. Its geopolitical implications could be even more profound than we think at this time. Into the pandemic, if we see, it has shattered the global health security, devastated the world economy, and accelerated great power rivalry. The second point I would like to flag here is it a tectonic shift in the way we think about the international order? We have had anthropocentric theories that have come from the West. Should we then move to Indo-centric views, like the nature-centric views? One view I would like to flag here is the view of the Panchabhutas, that ancient Indian philosophy and Buddhist philosophy always respected that the smallest of creatures have their place in the universe. Is this environmental degradation and devastation and climate change also a part of the problem? So we as human beings and as theoreticians of the international relations have to change many of these narratives that we have been used to. I think it's very important that we have more narratives from the developing world of Latin America, Africa, and Asia. The third point that I would like to bring in is the COVID crisis has brought in. See, India has been a democracy for 73 years. Until this crisis came in, democracy was never seen as a strategic asset. Today, India is seen as a democratic asset because India and China are the only two civilizational states to enter the fourth industrial revolution. And here I would like to contest a theory that has been put forward, saying that India has been a successful democracy or an oasis of democracy, not because of the British rule in India. Why then Myanmar, Pakistan, several other ruled states are not democracies? I think the credit should go more to the Indian political culture, which is in the celebration of diversity. The concept of Ekam Sat Vipraha Bahuda Vadanti, meaning truth may be one, but there are several parts to it. The very fact that we respect diversity, we respect difference, and we think it's very beautiful. The other issue which I would like to do is what the last two speakers raised, a very important issue, especially Ambassador Kumar and my earlier speaker, the issue of the state. There is no retreat of the state. There were fears given by many writers of international relations that there is a retreat of the state. I would rather say there is a transformation of the state. The COVID crisis is bringing in or returning the welfare state, something that we never had all these. We had it earlier, but then there was a contestation, especially during the period of globalization, whether the state would return. And here the welfare state has come to become very important, especially even in most developing countries where we have. So the and vis-a-vis India, I would like to bring in that this new COVID crisis, which has made a paradigm shift, is brought out a new normal in India's foreign and defense policy. Our relations with China, as well as the capability of the Indian state in bringing in its citizens, the Vande Bharat missions. I think we have been one of the few countries which took such a huge man-made mission to bring our people back into the country. The vaccine wars is another thing. A competition that we see with the new geopolitics is the vaccine wars. You have different countries fighting. You have Russia already, which has gone ahead with the vaccine. In the US, I don't think the vaccine will come out till the elections are over. They seem to be more divided than we in India are. And the other question I'm more worried is will the vaccine be available to all and accessible, meaning can we pay for it? Or is it going to be so expensive that it is not going to be in the reach of many of the poor or the, what to say, of the world? This is the other issue that I want to raise. The issue with higher education, I'm very happy you raised, because I also belong to the University of Pune, which is now renamed as Savitribai Phule, Pune University, is the digital divide. We also have online lectures, but let me tell you, many of my students cannot access these because they don't have the instruments, even a mobile phone. So it is a question of haves and have-nots. So we are creating another new inequality in the digital world. How will we be able to bridge this digital divide is an extremely important issue that I would like to raise here. And my last point, sir, would be the primacy of the political. What this COVID war has brought in is the primacy of the political. To a large extent, saying that economics will have to work with the political. It is the political that is going to take primacy, and politics and economics would have to work together. That is, power is extremely important, and political power will be more important because that is the way they could reach out in the state doing it. And finally, I want to have a word on geopolitics, that is, the defining steps of a new geopolitical order after the coronavirus crisis seems to include certain key issues. First of all, it is necessary to address the speculation on COVID-19. If the coronavirus is lab-made or an out-of-control science experiment. Countries that suffer from this pandemic will demand compensation from the country or countries that caused it. Even if the coronavirus catastrophe was sparked as a result of natural changes in microorganisms, then the countries affected by the virus may still seek to claim compensation from the country or countries responsible, since they have not taken measures on time. The other issue when we talk of the geopolitical order is all that has happened in the course of the catastrophe, not the pandemic, I would call it a catastrophe, should be the warning to all countries against any possible biological terror attacks in the future. I somehow think we in the international community, except for the United States, have been extremely civil and courteous in saying things. So there's an urgent need to expand state capacities in case of such attacks is evident. Laboratories that conduct biological research may be asked to be more transparent and ready to be monitored by an international mechanism. The establishment of an institution like the International Atomic Energy Agency, IAEA, and regular inspection of such laboratories could be a critical step. This, I would think, is extremely. And finally, a word on the Quad. There have been realignments in the region, especially the region that we call the Indo-Pacific. And India has been playing a major role with USA, Australia, Japan, and India's relations with Taiwan also have taken a major change due to the recent COVID crisis and the way China has behaved. Finally, I would only say that the coronavirus pandemic has exposed, like no crisis before, just how difficult it has become now for great powers to come to a common agreement. So is the future world order going to be more conflictual, more nationalistic than cooperative? Is globalization of the international economy taking a retreat rather than the state? Thank you so much.
Thank you, Dr. Pandit. Thank you very much. You see some common themes running between the three speakers we've had, and yet some changes, different perspectives. I'm noting it. I'll come back to it later on. As I said, I'd rather speak at the end. Our next speaker is Dr. Ivan Pacheco. He's a research fellow, Center for Entitled Higher Education at Boston College. He's from Colombia, and he'll be speaking to us on COVID-19 and higher education, challenges and opportunities from a Latin American perspective. So in that sense, we are getting one more Latin American perspective coming out in this session. So over to you, Dr. Pacheco. Your 14, 15 minutes.
Thank you very much. I'm not sure if you can see my screen.
Yeah, we can see.
Okay.
If you can just, if we just bring the entire maximum screen, it's just that we don't see the sidebars, you know? Yeah, right there.
Okay. So, no, wait a minute.
No, it's not good.
No, wait, that's better. So, well, first of all, thank you very much for this invitation. It has been really exciting to participate here. So this is what I want to address in this short presentation. I want to give you an overview of Colombia. So, although my title said a Latin American perspective, and I think that was overreaching. So I will focus just on Colombia with very short snapshots to what may happen in other Latin American countries, but the main focus will be Colombia. That's my country. So we'll have first an overview of the country, then I will guide you through a very short trip for the first reactions, both from the government and higher education institutions during the first month of the pandemic. Then we will go through the challenges that institutions and the government faced during that time and afterwards. How was the negotiation process among the different actors, and looking to the future, what we have. So Colombia is a medium-sized country in the north of Latin America. It has an estimated number of 50.3 million inhabitants, not so big compared to India, but still one of the largest in Latin America. And our enrollment in higher education for 2018 was 2.4 million students, evenly distributed between public and private institutions. Although the number of private higher education institutions is larger, which is kind of common for many countries with dual public-private systems. Since April 2020, since April this year, we are members of the OECD, which may speak well about our economy and development. But on the other hand, our Gini coefficient is 49.7, meaning that we are one of the most unequal countries in the world. So that's a big challenge that we need to address. So now let me take you through the first reaction using a very simple timeline. And it starts on March 11, when the World Health Organization declared COVID-19 a pandemic. The next day, the Colombian president declared, like the government, declared a health emergency. And that very same day, there was a joint statement by the Ministry of Education and different higher education institutions, organizations. We will talk later about this joint statement. 10 days later, the Ministry of Education issued a set of guidelines on the use of technology for education. 2 days later, the country was immersed in a full lockdown, a quarantine that lasted until September 1st, just a few weeks ago. And on April 8th, there were some guidelines from the government. Actually, there was a new law regarding standardized testing, a waiver, because it was supposed to be a mandatory requirement to access higher education. And if you see, there's a yellow section on Easter vacation, and that's important because that made it easier for higher education institutions to enter the quarantine mode and gave them some time to adapt for this challenge. So let's talk about the shared statement. And please remember the organizations that are here. I have, in addition to the education, the Ministry of Education, we have ASCUN, SUE, and the TTU network. We will go back to these institutions later. Now, in the statement, the government and higher education institutions said that they will work together to address the challenges of the emergency. The second thing that they did was acknowledging that higher education institutions had already done much for fighting or contributing to avoid the negative impact of the pandemic. But at the same time, the autonomy of higher education institutions was recognized. And in our country, autonomy has like a very strong tradition, and you, as a government, you should not mess with it. And but finally, despite their autonomy, higher education institutions said, because, well, they have to, that they will follow general and specific measures to address the pandemic. The general measures are basically the same as in many other countries. The sector-specific measures, including canceling events of more of 500 people, then this number went shrinking to 50 and then to none, limiting international mobility, establishing a sanitary vigilance system, strengthening virtual education, which to be more technical and detailed, it was not virtual education, it was remote education, and providing remote student services whenever it was possible, services like library, counseling, or any other service that the institution had. So as Dr. Perrotta said before, higher education institutions in Colombia, as in many other countries in Latin America, deliver services to their communities, both to their internal communities and to the external communities through outreach. And these services included from food or equipment for students and teachers, passing by psychological support to students abroad, general information on the pandemic, and I mean, many other things. And very similar things for in terms of outreach, food and supply, psychological support, exercise, entertainment, as Dr. Perrotta mentioned before. And of course, there were research played a significant role in all of this. And I would say that almost every single university and most of higher education institutions contributed somehow. Research included medical research, epidemiological research, research on economics, on legal aspects. So there was a lot of research done or made visible during this time. And there was a call, this Mincienciaton was a call for proposal from the Ministry of Science. And the Ministry of Science is different to the Ministry of Education, but they were looking for tools that could be used to fight the pandemic challenge, including technology or processes or monetary systems. It was for $7 million, which isn't a lot of money, but was a significant amount of money. And the lines of research included public health, diagnostic systems, monitoring, etc. So this was just one way in which the government articulated with higher education institutions. However, this call for proposals was not targeted only to higher education institutions. Actually, it was open to the public, but most of the proposals and had at least one partner who was a higher education institution. And there was more in terms of technological development. Here you have 4 examples that I took from the website from ASCUN, which is the Association of Colombian Universities. And what you see here are technological developments that were aimed at helping with fighting the pandemic, including depressurized isolation chambers, patient isolation chambers, thermal cameras, vital equipment monitoring. At the website of ASCUN, they put together a list of examples. It doesn't pretend to be a comprehensive list. It's just a list of examples of what universities has done. It covered not just technology or research, but outreach and many other possible contributions. But the list goes over 300 examples of what institutions have done in this moment. So that was like the good part, but there were challenges, as all of you know, because all of us have lived it. The first one was remote education. And like Argentina, as presented by Dr. Perota, Colombia had a more favorable approach to higher education, to virtual higher education. There's a growing enrollment rate in virtual education in the country. And right now, I think we are in a 20% of our global enrollment, our total enrollment comes from distance education. There's a favorable regulatory environment. And when the crisis started, the Ministry of Education launched a project called Plan Padrino, sponsored plan, in which a university that had good development on virtual and distance education will mentor another higher education institution so they could be able to deliver remote education to their own students. So that was our first challenge. The second challenge is the same one you will see in your institutions, and is the challenge of inequality. Inequality acted just like a magnifying glass, and it made this inequality, the pandemic acted as a magnifying glass, and the financial inequalities, access inequalities just grew bigger and were more visible. And for some students, even when their classes were online, as some of you have mentioned before, it meant that they weren't able to get access to all what they have to do for their classes. Then one of the fears was declining enrollment. So national enrollment in higher education was already declining before the pandemic at a very slow rate, but was already declining. The initial estimates for drop off in higher education, in private higher education mostly, was between 25 and 50%. Those numbers turn out to be inflated, and the actual decline at this point is estimated in approximately 10%. There are no definitely numbers yet. And that was possible through tuition discounts, student loans, and the family efforts. So financing was the third problem, either in terms of demand, students were asking for free tuition, tuition discounts, student loans, or for supplies. I mean, financing for higher education institutions who were asking for institution loans, student loans, resources from government, or tax exceptions. And then it started what it was like really a negotiation process involving the government, higher education institutions, and the students. But it finally ended in the government because neither higher education institutions or students had enough money to address it. Needless to say, the government didn't have enough money either. So student activism took an important role here, And I have here some snapshots from press from Colombia, Peru, and Ecuador. It was kind of generalized in the region. Higher education institutions, remember the institutions I mentioned before, the associations, now they were asking for a financial component, better connectivity, fee waiver for their students. The government enrolled, granted payroll protection loans, student loan relief, and support for students. So looking to the future, and this is my last one, student retention will continue to be an issue in our context. The institution survival, mostly for private higher education institutions, is still a challenge. The redefinition of quality assurance, which I didn't mention, but in terms of what is quality assurance, what is distance education, how are the visits on quality assurance be conducted, and so on. The challenge is how to capitalize all this knowledge, all that research from this last month, how to make it for having a better society. And finally, are we looking for a new model for higher education in which face-to-face or in-person education is just one more instrument to deliver higher education? So I think I'm just in my 15 minutes, so thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Dr. Pacheco. I think many of the issues you raised resonates very well here. Of course, the scale is different and income levels are different, but many of it does resonate with us very, very strongly. And in fact, our last speaker, in one sense, will be complementing what some of you have been saying. Is our last speaker is Mr. Krishna. Where is my phone gone? My phone has all the details. And he worked for Microsoft and looks after digital transformation and strategies. So may I now request Mr. Where my phone has packed up, unfortunately, Mr. Raj Krishnan. So I'm not able to get your full designation, your long designation, which had, I know, strategies, and it had digital transformation and that, right?
Yes.
So may I now request you to take over.
All right. I just want to make sure you can hear me. You can see my screen.
Loud and clear. Your screen is very clear and your voice is clear.
All right. Hello. And, I've been just looking for a most appropriate multi-time zone greeting, which I haven't been able to find. So I'm just going to say good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are. For me, it's actually morning. Oh, somebody muted me.
For a fraction of a second, you're there. Otherwise, it must be very early in the morning in Chicago.
Yes, it's so the thing is, I'm about half awake, and most of you may be half asleep, and this is the last session. So I couldn't ask for a better way to present my content. So let me just go, I think, start with my presentation. All right. So what I thought I'd do is I have about 3 sections. The first one is just giving how universal it is, which we all know, just to give you the magnitude, and then how industries are coping up in terms of handling such a universal pandemic. And my second thing is based on my expertise, which is the supply chain, how supply chain has been impacted by this pandemic and what changes are happening there. And then finally, everything kind of depends on the health. So I just wanted to share my opinion about the containment and the health scenarios. So this is, I think we all agree.
Your voice is breaking up a bit. Your voice is breaking up a little bit. I wonder why. Is it my system which is problematic?
Yes,
I don't know.
That. Yeah, I think I've had this issue when I'm Zoom.
I think he has some network issues.
Yeah, that's right. Occurring at your end, Raj. It's not occurring here. Some reverberations, some background, what should I say, bounce back.
Okay, let me see if I can stop sharing my video and Okay, is this a little better?
Yes, it is.
Okay, for some reason, when I'm using Zoom, I seem to have this problem. Okay, is it clear now, or you're still?
Very clear, very, very clear. Please go ahead.
Okay. Yeah, I think I just shut down my video. So,
Yeah.
Okay. Let's see. I'm sure I'll get to the content. Okay. So one thing we all agree is that this is a disaster unlike any other. Right? Even your grandfather or your uncle who always tells you they've seen everything, even they admit they have not seen anything like this. Right. The other day, I just after about 6 months, I went to a movie theater because they just opened the movie house, and then I went to see Tenet, the blockbuster. And when the lights went off, and when I sat, and then the IMAX sound just came on, I just realized how I was deprived of such small pleasures because of this pandemic. And then I looked around, there were 12 people in the theater, in spite of all the precautions. It has affected us in every aspect of our life. Right? I saw the other day in the news where a student taking a college course, and then she did not have internet connectivity, and then she goes to McDonald's. And obviously, McDonald's is, the free internet is not geared for streaming or that kind of a workload. And she said, I'm just quitting. I'm just leaving this course. So it is affecting all of us. Even in the clothing, people are now, they're buying, their sizes have changed. And some of them, the sizes have gone down because they're exercising heavily because of the time available. But most of the people are getting into bigger size, and even at our home, we never used to have pizzas and things like this, but we are ordering more of those. It is affecting us in every aspect of our life. So there's no doubt about that. And when you look at the sectoral impact, clearly the leisure and hospitality industry is probably one of the most affected. Like for example, in Chicago, they have started, playing baseball and football. But the biggest aspect, which is the crowd, is not there. So the hot dog vendors, the bars, and they're not seeing, in spite of some kind of normalcy, they're not seeing that. The retail trade is one of the things that's affected very heavily. The manufacturing, so there is a difference between vulnerability and disruptiveness, right? The reason manufacturing is, still good because people still need goods. Like for example, if you look at craft, even there you can see the social trend, right? They used to have a reduction in mac and cheese, which is considered unhealthy. So people were just going for healthy food, but now suddenly it has reversed. So there's a big production of manufacturing of mac and cheese now. They've increased that line. So manufacturing is probably not affected in terms of output or the demand, but it is definitely affected by the disruptiveness in terms of the supply chain, right? So these are all, and then the other factor, like someone mentioned, is that this, when we come out of all this, how is it going to look like? I think people have a lot of concerns around that. Now, from a technology thing, what we are seeing is, we say that industries are responding in 3 different phases. One is react. So as soon as this happened, immediately people started, finding ways to work. Like for Microsoft, for example, we just about a year, are you still hearing a little? Okay.
Yes.
Still, we introduced.
It did come out a little bit, but you're back to okay.
Yeah. Okay. Can you hear?
It's there, but you're visibly okay. We can hear you. But that critical sound somehow comes every now and then, In between, you are very clear, but it's all right. We can still hear you well enough. Don't worry.
Okay. Yeah. So the we introduced tools like virtual desktop. What it means is that you can use any cheap computer, your Chromebook or anything, but you can log into the cloud where your robust company certified machine is running in the cloud. And we saw an extreme growth in that business because now, instead of buying solid computer for everyone and securing it, a lot of people went into that. And as you know, the success of Zoom and all the virtual meetings, right? That is the immediate way to react. In the rebound is, I think someone mentioned in the previous thing is, it's not a question of whether you can do things remotely, but do you have the resources? Just look at what we are going through, right? I've always had problem with Zoom. My network bandwidth is not there. And what kind of speaker and microphone and camera should I have? There are enabling that some of the institutes in the US actually are giving away computers because students do not have computers. I think somebody mentioned about lack of resources in all these countries. It's same in US. The rural areas, the internet connectivity is terrible. Students do not have computers. So it's not about remote education, but can you enable them? So there are a lot of effort trying to kind of supply the right things and providing the infrastructure. And then the control the physical occupancy. So using contact tracing, using testing, and then having a system for space management so that you can actually have some people go into the buildings in a controlled manner. That's what we call the rebound stage. But then, like somebody mentioned in the previous talk, should we look at the whole thing differently? What should a higher education? Is face-to-face education, somebody mentioned, is it a one of the options rather than the only option? So how do you reimagine the whole workspace? How do you redesign? How do you work? Maybe 2 days you come to work. And then you need to also have measures. You might have seen some trends in the past, right? The telecommuting was losing its favor because people thought we have no clue what people are doing and there is no face-to-face communication. So if you recall a few months back, Yahoo said, no, everybody must come back to work. But now it's the reverse. And there are people saying some people will never come back to their office because this works will remain remote. And then, I recently listened to one of the energy companies said, we want to relook at our facility, right? We have so many fixed assets. Now, nobody in the building, we are spending money maintaining that. How do we optimize facilities? So that's what we think about reimagine. Yes, this will have an impact in the future, how things are done. And now it's remote everything, right? So it's like now Walmart is looking at drone shipment. As you know, Amazon has a store without people using AI to track what you're buying. People are collaborating with Slack and Teams. So everything is remote learning. Now, from a supply chain perspective, which is my focus area, I just borrowed this shamelessly from one of the World Bank talk. So when you look at supply chain, there are three things in supply chain: flow of information, flow of funds, and flow of goods, right? Here, we're just focusing on flow of funds. But unlike the 2008 crisis, where the demand was affected, supply was okay. And then through some subsidies and the government moves, we were able to kind of bring up the demand, and we were relatively smooth transition. But this is unlike any other, where in 2 months, the entire demand and supply chain got disrupted, right? Everything is affected. From bankruptcies, from the multiple supply chains. Everything got broke at the same time. And this crisis is unlike any other. So both, like another big difference between the 2008 and now is the interdependency of the countries in trade. Now, you may think you're buying something from Mexico, but Mexico depends on China for its raw materials. So there is a tremendous dependency between the countries, which makes this both from a value chain in terms of value added, as well as trade. There is so much interdependency. This is a major disruption in the supply chain. And then the top thing says containment policies and unusual recession, because The containment policies have tremendous impact in terms of how it'll impact the recession, which is what I just want to talk about next. So what is the challenge? I think the challenge is some of these things, right? Again, I borrowed this, it kind of talks about this. So there are three kinds of population: susceptible population, infectious population, and then the protected. Professor Rooney told me that unless you put some equations, people won't think it's a credible presentation. So I had to put some equation here. So this one is, what it's saying is that at the equilibrium of number of infectious contact per period per infected person times infection, and the S is the susceptible. That is the new cases. The gamma time infection is the recovery. So when both of them are equal, that is where, that equilibrium. Obviously, what we want is the number of infection less than, the recovery. Now, in this equilibrium state, based on the epidemiology and the statistics for COVID, that R0 is 2 or 3. Now, the beta is the number of infectious contact, right? That is the controllable factor that governments and other institutions can do. And if you just half the beta, then instead of half or 1/3, it could be 1/4 or 1/8. So there is a tremendous impact on the supply chain and everything that we do on the beta value, which is where the countries and the governments can have an impact. But when you look at the data, it is alarming. That beta is not going down. This is as of yesterday, from Johns Hopkins University, right? This is the trend. Look at everything going, nothing is coming down. It's unbelievable that we have 31 million cases globally. And one of the things is that this is maybe my personal opinion. I look at the pattern. Look at the countries. Look at the countries, and it is estimated in 2 months India will beat US based on the things, assuming the data we get from India is accurate. There's one trend I see, and it may be a political point of view, is the leadership, right? What I see is most of these countries where the cases are high, there is a refusal to believe that this is a real issue. And there's an attempt to politicize this issue. And there is no desire to use science to control and put the proper containment measures in place. There are, take Sweden, for example, they have taken a measure where it's a herd immunity. But when you look at that in the country, one of the things that they've done is that people listen to the government. When the government said, okay, we're not going to mandate masks, but we recommend that you reduce outdoor activities, and people listen. And then, so there's a role of government. Look at Germany or New Zealand. So it's not even a pattern. You cannot say it's a small population. Germany is a reasonable size of population. Definitely leadership in what the government does has a major impact. Now, finally, I think the person that I admire, I just wanted to close with this. This is universal, but it is more important at this time of the crisis. And I saw her deliver this in an interview, and it resonates with me so much. And she said, one lives not just for oneself, but for one's community. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Raj. Thank you very much, Raj. Yes, we live for our communities, and there are many issues. We should have made an announcement earlier on to our audience that they can put in their questions, but there haven't been any questions so far, other than a few compliments. I think what we did see across today was lots of that things consistently coming through. One is the role of the state. Two, that leadership counts. That things are making a difference, that politics is very important. And therefore, I'm linking the two, leadership and politics. Politics is very important, that politics counts, that whether it's economics, whether it's other factors, it is the political intent which is important. And too long, we've thought of ourselves, our societies, as being technocratic. It's possibly wrong. In fact, I would argue it is very, very wrong. Not that it should not be efficient, but if efficiency leads to a situation where your Gini coefficient goes through the roof, then your societies are in deep trouble. And therefore, the deprivation is bad, But for social stability, we've seen that actually relative depreciation could actually be worse. It's not to argue in favor of everybody being uniformly poor. No, not at all. We obviously have to strive for a much better world. But this world itself is changing, and with this new shock that has come, it is a pandemic. It is more than whether it can be compared with Spanish flu. One is a terrible name. The first Spanish were not responsible for the flu. They just get better records. The USA at war did not, and Spain being a neutral did. A bad rap for it. Or well back in history, the Black Death, the plague. Change led to what is now we call modernization, led to industrialization, led to institutional change, joint stock companies, parliamentary democracies, etc. That was a humongous thing, but of course that lasted a long time. And human life was very, very scarce, since that you lost 1/3 of the population of many societies. So before I have something, as anybody in the audience would like to say something or raise a question or something, can you raise your hand or put in a question? Or should I, in the meantime, address? I think I'll go back to our first speaker, Ambassador Mohan Kumar. Mohan, okay, Ruston, there's a question for Ruston. And his question is, with respect to the current pandemic, could renewable resources and non-renewable resources be elaborated? And this question is asking to Ambassador Mohan Kumar. So Mohan, over to you. Would you like to answer that?
Right. So my sense is that if you want to accept that a crisis should never be wasted, a crisis also offers an opportunity. And if you are starting from ground zero, like India, after a couple of months, our economy has tanked and everything. I like the way the government is going about reforms, for example, agricultural reforms, labor reforms. Similarly, it is my sense that if we can, those of us who haven't made this quantum jump from a coal-based economy to an economy which can be carbon neutral, I think this is the time to do it. You can really make that big jump. So for me, the coronavirus or the COVID-19 offers an opportunity for countries to go towards a new Green Deal, a new green economy. And I think India can do it. We have already made strides in so far as our intended nationally determined contributions are concerned with regard to the Paris Agreement. The one thing I remember since I was in Paris and we were asked to indicate a peak year for emissions. And we were reluctant to do it because obviously with 30 to 40% of the people still not having 24/7 electricity or power, we couldn't do it. But it seems to me that COVID will accelerate the trend towards a new green economy. That's what I wanted to say. Thank you, Shakti.
So, sir, do you mean to say that COVID is actually an advantage regarding this electricity and other sources?
I think if I could just jump in, as Mr. Mohan was saying, never waste an opportunity. It was terrible. It's not an advantage. Having got into the position, what should we do? So in that sense, and building on that, and this is where I would like to ask both our friends from the Americas, from Cartagena or Colombia and from Buenos Aires. Both you talked about how strong your public university system is. In Argentina, of course, the enrollment rate seems to be very high, maybe not so in Colombia, publicly funded, autonomy, etc. How does that impact, let me say, in terms of the adoption of better, more inclusive social policies without, sometimes we adopt so-called social policies that promote equality at the cost of economic growth. Now, of course, Colombia has a long history of the civil war, which is the longest possibly. So obviously that's complicated situations. But how does a society like that going forward is able to leverage on the manpower, the human beings who have been through the university system, the women and the men, how do you leverage that into promoting and creating a more inclusive society? A question to both of you. whether it is Dr. Pacheco or Dr. Daniela Perota, whoever one of you wants to start first.
Okay, Daniela,
Ivan, you can go first if you want.
We have a saying, you first, and then nobody starts. Daniela, why don't you start?
Okay, so I don't know if I understand completely the question, Shakti. What actually would be the main issue you want me to answer? Or is it
okay, let's clarify it. You have a very strong public university system.
Yes.
You also have a strong research system, though separate and at some point you come together. It's publicly funded.
Yes.
And it's open to all, no admissions test. And yet, at the end of the day, how do you leverage that into creating a society which is more equal and therefore more stable, without resorting to crude populism that kills economic growth? So not at the cost of economic growth, but how do you make it more inclusive to reduce inequality in society going forward?
Yeah. Okay, well, if I understand, I know what you mean, but when I speak in these sessions, I always said that being an Argentinian, it's quite not difficult, but I have to make more things clear or clearer, because the rest of the world, with some exceptions, mainly, for example, if I was speaking with an Uruguayan, they would be on the same trend as me. But what I mean to say, our education culture, our educational tradition, and this includes universities, and this includes the scientific and technological environment, is truly public. And it is very rooted in our society, the idea of public education, national education, right to education at the all levels. So it is a society that developed, and social mobility has to do with it, with the idea of a system that make more homogeneous our country. This relates to our immigrations waves of the 19th century, as from our independence, and then the migration, how the country was created and how different traditions were merged into our country. So it is a long-standing history of how we envision ourselves, our education system, and our universities. So universities and access to higher education is massive, and this relates to a more inclusive and inclusive society, or at least opportunities for everyone. One of the most innovative policies of the last decade was to create one university in each state, and especially in this in the surrounding metropolitan area of the city of Buenos Aires, where most of the population is, and especially there, these universities have received first generation students. So universities are a key factor in providing people more opportunities for the labor market, for improving themselves, for cultural assistance, so on and so forth. So universities play a crucial role. Nevertheless, as we have some constraints regarding the economy and some particularities of the country, and the idea that we are an underdeveloped country or a semi-peripheral country, lots of things need to be done as well. So everyone can enter, but the huge policy measure and the most broader political measure that we need to take into account is how to make those students be on the system and graduate. So there is a difference between entering
Ah,
and graduating. That is one of the, and I have to be very careful with this because there is a branch of scholarship, and of course with a political biases, that says that this is a problem. On the other hand, some people are, I say that even though you do not graduate, university provides you with skills that are important for your life, not for employment and for your daily life. So we as a country created the condition for massive attendance to higher education. The next step is how to retain those students, especially in these conditions, and how to make them graduate. So if you look at the graduation rates, we have some issues there. It is expected. So if everyone can enter because there are no exams, it is not meritocratic, but it is egalitarian. So that's one thing to say. But we have expanded the system of the university system and the scientific and technological system as well. One of the key measures of the last government, the previous government, the Cristina Fernandez and Néstor Kirchner's government measure was to provide more scholarships for conducting PhDs in the country and researchers. So we have one of the most advanced as well scientific and technological systems of the regions. And we have to cope with this thing, with this, they are not weaknesses, they are things to be solved by the by politics and the state. So that's the key question. I have a question here. Have the forces of liberalization not impacted your government adopt privatization as it has in the most developing countries? Well, as I mentioned, the higher education system is so packed, and autonomy and the idea of public good is so rooted in ourselves, in our academic culture, in our society, that liberalization forces they do enter, but they did not enter as in other countries. It's not Argentina is not like Chile, it's not like Brazil, it's not like Colombia either. We have been able to leverage those pressures, especially by strong political mobilization of the actors of the system. Higher education institutions, deans, students, professors, and the society as well. I was recalling that 2 years ago, with the previous administration, who was a right-wing government, we had a massive university mobilization regarding the right to higher education and asking for financing for universities. It was one of the biggest social mobilizations of our recent history regarding higher education. So there are forces pressing, but there are some actors of the system that try to leverage those pressures. For example, in Argentina, for a private institution to settle, it has to be approved by a National Commission of Accreditation and Evaluation of Universities. So private universities do not pop up as in other countries. There are strong regulations that allows us to control the growing of that sector. Of course, the most privatized sector of university is the postgraduate programs. That's where the market is, and especially under-financed activities, the links between industry and university becomes more blur, the frontier is more blur, but compared to other systems within the region, we have a more publicly and protected system that relates to our tradition. We cannot explain the Argentinian case without understanding how the state was created and how what university represents for our people at all levels.
We'll come back to you. Even when you answer my question, there's also a question whether how do you make policies in education in a very diverse society, you know? But yes, first, of course, is the question of how do you leverage higher education to make for a more inclusive society?
For me or for Ivan?
No,
For
Mr. Pacheca, Ivan.
Well, this is not just a problem of poor countries or developing countries. This is one of the main questions of public policies in education. But I don't know how you do it. I know what people have tried to do to achieve that goal, because clearly we haven't been very successful at doing that. But while higher education is considered still a social mobility avenue, and it is highly rooted, at least in middle class and lower class in Colombia, and it's highly regarded. So the policies focus right now in two main issues in Colombia. One is quality, actually three issues: quality, access, and financing. And those are considered like the iron triangle, not just for education, but for many other public services. All the efforts to expand access to higher education may have an impact in quality. If you expand the base of people incoming higher education, it may affect the quality of the education they will serve. And I mean, we can make a whole event just on this question, but I would say that the focus has been expanding access by allowing people to enter higher education, either by financing the provision of higher education through public universities, or the demand of higher education through tuition. That combined with guaranteeing good quality education. The underlying assumption is that by providing good quality education for a larger number of people, that will translate into a more development and a more equal and fair society. However, that has not been achieved yet. At least not in Colombia, though through access to education, you can see that there's some economic mobility. But I mean, I know the time is limited, so I'll stop here.
Okay, thank you. In fact, it's a lot of questions are being raised, but I'll not get stop on that point. There are obviously issues of equity, but there's also a trade-off between efficiency in that sense of public finance and the strangulation of economic growth by stressing on equity at the cost of economic growth, which has happened in Latin America, which has definitely happened in Argentina historically. But my system is backing up. Hello.
Yes,
hello.
audible.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
I'm losing it. Anyway, so I would request Shanti Pandit to just quickly, very quickly in 1 minute, tell us something about how Quad would make a difference in this part of the world in terms of containing breakdown of tensions, in containing the growth of tensions and preventing breakdown of the established order. Dr. Pandit, could you just quickly touch on it? Because that's a good, you have raised the point.
Thank you, Mr. Sinha. Thank you so much. First thing I would say is one of the geopolitical impacts of the present COVID pandemic is attempt of destabilizing the present order, both politically, economically, as well as in military sense. So looking at this, whether we are going to replace the American neoliberal dominant order with a Chinese, China is attempting to be the new global power. There is no, I don't think they are hiding their ambitions in any way. The question is, from an Indo-Indian point of view, what would we from India prefer? What is good for us? It's a choice between the devil and the deep sea. I would say that India would anyway prefer the present order continuing. And if you have to contain China from its very ambitious nationalistic and militaristic ambitions, we had a good taste of it on our border in June and others. So it is very important that India is not a great power. I would rather say India is a swing state, a state that joins any side and then makes a difference. Mm-hmm. And here I would say that it is very important and strategically, realistic for India to join with other powers. The present situation has woken up, especially the eyes of countries like Australia, Taiwan, and Japan. Japan had already mentioned about the alliance with the United States and with India on the other side. So this whole concept of the Quad in the Indo-Pacific is extremely important. It brings back an old concept of international relations in George Kennan, that is containment. Mm-hmm. And containment of China is extremely vital for India's security. I don't think we may, whatever friendship, Hindi, Chini, bhai we do, it is not very realistic because China would not like to have any, any idea or anywhere near to a peer status with India. We are rivals by the very nature of our geography and geopolitics, and I think we should wake up to this. That is why I would say even in foreign policy, we have to change to a Kshatriya foreign policy. Thank you, Shakti.
Thank you. Thank you. I want to wind up in the next 3 minutes or 4. So I would just quickly like two people, both Raj and Mohan, to give in their 30 seconds bit, and then I'll speak for a minute or two, and then we can wind up this session to respond to many of the things said. And Raj was raising points as questions also on the education thing. I think Raj should respond to the question that he raised. And Mohan, so 30 seconds each, and then we'll wind up. Raj, first you and then Mohan.
Oh, so do you want me to, like, in terms of the education?
Then you raised a very good point with Daniela, so I thought you should quickly touch on it,
Yeah. I mean, one of the things, it's a big challenge in United States, right? The cost of education is extremely high, but then the quality of education is also very good. Now, one of the things that they are trying to do in US is the states are trying to promote the low-income people. Like, for example, in Chicago, the mayor came up with a thing that if you are from low income and minority, your college education in the community college will be free, right? So to me, I don't know if I have the solutions. How do you maintain high quality education, and how do you make it equitable so that all the people have the opportunity? It is a challenge. I think the US is on one extreme, and then some other countries are in the other extreme. There must be a way, like we used to have Reverend Jackson, who said that the school system should not be based on taxing, right? I live in an affluent area, great school system. Low income area, terrible school system. How can you improve a country when your education system is based on income, right? I think they need to find education as a universal thing where there should be a common pool of fund for making education equal, giving opportunities to people. That's my.
Absolutely. Mohan, could you quickly, 30 seconds, answer your question on the SDGs, climate change? Will the pandemic make a difference to achieving these goals?
So thanks, Shakti. So I genuinely think the COVID merely accelerated the trends that were evident before the COVID. So I think I would advise against treating this as BC and AC, before Corona and after Corona. That would be a mistake. Secondly, I do believe that the old liberal international order is pretty much over. We are looking at a messy period in geopolitical relations where I think the states which are nimble, which are strong, and which take risks, they will make it. And the states which are conservative and they keep going back to their own thinking, they will fail. This is broadly my view. And therefore, I think states have to shun the kind of thinking that used to dominate their foreign policy. Try to think out of the box and see what is good for you. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Let me quickly, Rasa, before you say thank you, let me just speak for a minute. Thank you very much. I think it was a very thought-provoking things. Not everything said was I would agree with, but it was worthwhile to listen and really create ideas in your brain. I agree with Mohan that this is not AC and BC. This is not something. But of course, the trouble with history, change in history is, while you're in the change, you don't notice it. It's only after the change that you notice how momentous the change was. An inflection point can never be predicted. Never. Having said that, there are certain things changing. The role of the state has become very, very important. Absolutely. I don't think that anybody can doubt about it. But how does the state react to it? And I'm a little hesitant in giving good marks to states very quickly. States which we thought were very good in the first part of the first few months of Corona, later didn't prove to be so good after all. And sometimes comparisons are unfair. A small island country which can cut itself off and a land-based country with open all around obviously face very, very different challenges in terms of isolating people. A country with a high per capita income can isolate itself much longer, where 40%, 90% of your labor is surviving on non-formal work, without a contract, without a salary. You obviously react differently. So, the matrices of judgment don't become too American, don't become too quantification is required, but don't get bogged down with too early in the game. We are still learning. We don't know what is happening. What policies have we adopted in the past is going to serve us. Now, in India on education, and there, Saraswati, I disagree with the point you raised. We have stressed, at our level of per capita income, which is just over $2,000 before the pandemic, $2,400 or so per capita income, with 25% enrollment in higher education of the relevant cohort, age cohort. It's remarkably high. In the last 10 years, our higher education has shot up. Now it will stagger, it will fall a little bit, because not the cost of education, the opportunity cost of education. So for us, it is not the tuition fee which is important, it is the opportunity cost. Can parents afford to let the children study, or should they go out and work and support the family? Those are real issues, but I think the countries which are able to, and there's the question I was raising to my friends from the Americas, is that the country which is able to leverage its educated workforce into solving problems, into developing innovative solutions, into getting out of old mindsets, whether education should be done completely online, completely contactless, or a combination. How much of brick mortar do you need? How do officers work? Again, I've seen kids in America go to Starbucks and sit in the corner. Starbucks always has the two very comfortable chairs in the corner with their homeworks and the computers open and spend hours and hours there. Because unlike McDonald's, the Starbucks Wi-Fi is slightly better, right? How much can you do it? To what extent? Issues of you should do it because you want to democratize education, but can your students afford it? How do you provide for affordability? How do you give them access? These are real issues that societies are able to be ahead of the curve, should be able to, because as I said, change happens at a faster speed. This is not a cell phone anymore. This is far better computer than any the rockets which went to the moon. Far, far ahead of it. It does everything for us, right? It's a bank, it's a post office, it's a calendar, it's a camera, it's a music system, it's a movie theater, it's everything. Did we know it? No. Alan Toffler said it in 1970. We believed him till 1990, then we forgot him, right? Because the change is very difficult to predict, and therefore society which is nimble enough, not so much to predict the change as to react to the change, and where possibly be proactive enough to then slightly make the deviations to suit their natural strengths. And that is what I think COVID is telling us, that this is what really our leaderships should be driving at, should understand, and should prepare our systems for. The economics will follow that. I think we've had 5 very, very good, very interesting people, a good conversation where we gave them enough room to get into explanatory modes, because for us it is better to understand how things work elsewhere and not just in our neighborhood. How do you have education system with a strong university system, a strong research system, and yet how do they interact together? And these are the kind of lessons that we really need to understand, and how to bridge the various divides. So Rao Saab, I think I should thank WHC and its partners for organizing this and for getting us people from Buenos Aires, from Boston, from Chicago, from Ashburn. Can you switch off your